Have you ever wondered what it feels like to stare death in the face and walk right back into life with a message you cannot unhear? Jerome Braggs seemed like any other young professional when he moved to Washington, D.C., fresh out of college, eager to build his future. Then, on New Year's Day, 2004, he lay in a hospital bed, told he had multiple organ failures, pneumonia, pancreatitis, and 7 days to live. What followed was not the end, but a journey through pure light and cosmic truth that reshaped everything he believed about illness, purpose, and the power of self-love. Stay with us to hear how Jerome went from facing imminent death twice to becoming a healer and guide for others, and let his story awaken the spark within you. If you've ever doubted there is more beyond our physical world, or longed for a deeper reason to rise each morning, this testimony could be your turning point. Now lean in as Jerome's own words begin his journey across the threshold and back again, and feel free to share what resonates most with you in the comments below. I still remember the exact moment when my world cracked open, though the date feels both distant and immortal in my mind. I'm Jerome Braggs, and in the span of two back-to-back New Year's celebrations in 2004 and 2005, I stood at death's threshold twice and returned to a life I barely recognized. My first brush with eternity began on the 1st of January, 2004, but it really started the night before, on New Year's Eve of 2003. I'd been wrestling with strange flu-like symptoms for days, my body aching, my energy drained, and every home remedy I tried, from rich chicken soup brewed with fresh herbs to a strict water fast to endless rest, seemed to mock me with the same unchanging pain. I called my mother partly out of fear and partly out of tradition. New Year's Eve was sacred to me, a night of hope, of fresh starts, of laughter and fireworks. I wanted that feeling back, the excitement of a new year, a new me, so badly that when I could barely lift my head, I still begged her for help. I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, chasing the bright lights of my first professional job straight out of college. My mother, still in Oklahoma, listened patiently over the crackling line. She could not prescribe medicine across state borders, she explained gently. Her voice trembled when she urged me to seek real medical care. Within hours, someone I barely knew was driving me through silent streets to a stark emergency room, its fluorescent lights flickering over a sea of white coats. Leaning back on the narrow hospital bed, I tried to explain myself. I think it's the flu, I told the ER doctor. Fever, chills, weakness, but I also have this strange swelling all through my limbs. She nodded courteously and ordered blood tests and x-rays. An hour became two blurred into three, and I lay there wondering whether the countdown to midnight even mattered. When she finally returned, I thought she'd deliver the usual prognosis, perhaps a shot of flu medication and a stern warning to rest. Instead, she wore an expression that froze my blood colder than any diagnosis. Behind her stood 5 or 6 other doctors, their faces grave as if they had gathered to pronounce a sentence. In her hand, she held a telephone and told me calmly, "You have a call." I stared at her. Nobody I knew would be calling me here. I had only lived in D.C. for a few months. My throat was raw, my voice a whisper, but I answered, "Hello?" Immediately, I recognized my mother's tremulous tone. "I'll be there in the morning," she said and hung up. My heart seized. If she was boarding a red-eye to fly across the country, this was no ordinary flu. I handed back the phone and watched as the circle of doctors closed in. The ER physician looked me in the eye and said in a voice as gentle as a tomb's hush, "Jerome, you don't have the flu. You have acute kidney failure, pneumonia, pancreatitis, a lung filled with fluid, and a parasite in your stomach." She paused to let each word sink in, then added, as if it were an afterthought, "And your tests show HIV advancing to AIDS. At this speed, you have about 7 days to live." Everything went quiet except for the pounding in my ears. My pulse roared like the horses of Revelation's Red Rider, Revelation 6-4. At 24 years old, I was told I would die by New Year's Day. The room seemed to darken, the machine's beeps growing distant and dim. In that instant, as I lay helpless beneath the stark hospital lights, I knew my life was about to change forever. The world around me blurred and then snapped back into focus in the most unsettling way I have ever known. I was 24 years old, and I had just been told I was dying from something I had convinced myself was only the flu. I lay there, stunned, my heart hammering against the crisp white sheets as if every beat might shatter me completely. For a moment, I feared the next breath would be my last. Then, as the initial shock began to hollow out my mind, something extraordinary happened. Without warning, the sterile hospital room dissolved. In its place, I found myself floating before a vast cinema screen made not of celluloid but of light and memory. It felt as though a higher power had pressed play on my life, and I watched every scene, every triumph, every misstep, every unspoken word projected in vivid detail. It was neither a dream nor a hallucination, but a sacred review. In that instant, I understood what St. Paul meant when he spoke of being transformed by the renewing of the mind in Romans 12, verse 2. I felt that transformation coursing through me. My childhood flickered past first. The innocence of Sunday mornings in the church pews, the sting of my first scraped knee, the taste of chocolate ice cream on a blazing July afternoon. Then came adolescence, that tug-of-war between freedom and fear, my secret longings concealed behind a youthful bravado. I saw every choice I had made to please others, every moment I had hidden my true self to avoid rejection, every single time I had swallowed my hopes to soothe someone else's comfort. As the images sped by, 5 questions emerged, as if woven by divine intention, into the tapestry of my memories. Was I happy with the life I had lived so far? Had I ever truly been myself, free from masks and pretense? Did I feel good about who I was, or had shame lodged in my heart like a splinter? Had I told the people I loved how much they meant to me, or had I left words unspoken that would never be uttered? And finally, did I believe I had fulfilled the purpose for which my soul had come into this lifetime? These questions pulsed through me like a relentless tide. I understood then that this was not punishment but revelation. Like the thief on the cross who cried out to Jesus and found mercy in Luke 23, verse 42, I stood before the bar of my own conscience. I saw the impact of every kindness withheld and every apology never offered. I witnessed the countless hours I had ceded to trivial pursuits while the deepest longings of my spirit lay neglected. Each unkind gesture glowed in that cosmic theater like embers threatening to ignite regret. In that sacred, silent moment, I felt both terror and awe. Terror for the life I could lose without change, awe at the infinite mercy that allowed me to see these truths before it was too late. And as the final scenes of that luminous review played out, I knew I had only one choice: to rise from that hospital bed a different man, committed to living fully, loving courageously, and embracing the purpose my soul had been waiting to fulfill. In that moment, I realized I was facing a paradox. My 24-year-old body stood on the brink of death, yet my spirit remained calm. I was not afraid to die, not because I welcomed the end, but because years of spiritual seeking had prepared me to know that death was not the end of my soul. I had walked a path of meditation, prayer, and study of scriptures, learning from teachers like C.S. Lewis, who wrote in Mere Christianity that our souls are eternal. I believed every cell of my being was more than flesh. I was a soul having a human experience, and I understood that this body was a temporary vessel. Yet, as the life review pressed on, my heart constricted with terror. The terror was not the fear of crossing over, but the brutal clarity that my answers to those 5 soul-searching questions were overwhelmingly no. I had not been happy with the life I had lived. I had chased stability and security rather than my deepest passions. I had settled for a job counseling men living with HIV and AIDS because it paid the bills. Yet my dream had always been to sing on a stage like Whitney Houston, whose voice once brought the world to its knees. I had never pursued that dream because I feared failure and rejection. I had never fully been myself. I had suppressed my art, my voice, my true desires to fit a mold of what I thought would bring approval. I had never truly loved and accepted myself. Romans reminds us that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. Psalm 139, verse 14. Yet I had looked in the mirror with shame rather than awe. I had withheld words of love from family and friends out of embarrassment or pride. I had carried regrets like heavy chains, and I had never embraced the purpose my soul had come here to fulfill. That realization cut deeper than any diagnosis. It was as if I stood at the foot of Mount Sinai, witnessing my own 10 commandments, carved not in stone, but in missed opportunities and broken promises to myself. The true terror was waking to the fact that I was dying without having truly lived. And in that terror, a spark of defiance ignited within me. I refused to let my soul's mission end in regret. Instead, I resolved then and there to shed the person I had been and rise as the man I was meant to become. That resolve would carry me back from the edge, stronger, wiser, and more determined to live each day in alignment with the eternal spark that cried out to be heard within me. I had moved to Washington, D.C. with a single burning ambition in my heart, to sing before thousands and feel the electricity of an audience's applause pulsing through my veins. Yet in that sterile hospital room, my voice felt trapped behind iron bars. Each morning, I'd wake in my tiny studio apartment balancing bills and dreams instead of melodies. My guitar gathered dust in the corner, while my soul starved for expression. I watched interviews with Lin-Manuel Miranda, who poured every fragment of his identity into Hamilton and rewrote what Broadway could be. His courage reminded me that art is born from truth, not performance. All my life I'd possessed an uncanny sense of people's hidden emotions. I could sense a mother's tears behind her forced smile and feel the tremor of a stranger's regret across a crowded room. It was as if God had gifted me a window into the human soul, an intuitive gift I suppressed for fear of being labeled strange. I grew up in a home where vulnerability felt like weakness. My parents praised strength, yet shushed my questions about the unseen world. Psalm 139-23 invited God to search my heart and know my anxious thoughts, but I never let that invitation touch my own fears. My deepest secret, though, was my own heart's desire. My sexuality felt like a forbidden chord looping in silence. Rather than embrace the love I felt, I buried it beneath layers of shame. I worried that confessing my true self would cost me approval and leave me standing under a harsh spotlight of judgment. I watched Lady Gaga reclaim her identity time and again, refusing to hide her truth even when the world demanded conformity. She showed me that authenticity could become a beacon for others. Lying there, unable to lift my head, I realized survival demanded more than breathing. It demanded breaking every silent promise I had made to myself. I vowed that if I returned from death, I would unleash my voice through song and share the gift of intuition without fear. I would declare to every friend and lover exactly how much I cherished them. I would stand unapologetically in my own skin. The terror I felt was not of death itself, but of a life unlived. Yet in that moment, I found a fierce resolve that would transform my body and soul. When the doctors whispered 7 days, they did not know they had given me a divine deadline to claim my purpose and dare to speak the truth of who I was meant to be. I had moved to Washington, D.C. with the single purpose of filling concert halls with my voice, dreaming of stages so vast that my songs would echo under chandeliers as bright as the stars themselves. But in that moment, lying still and fragile, I saw how little I had honored that dream. I'd spent years chasing applause instead of truth, believing that success lay in sold-out tickets rather than in the authenticity of every note I sang. Similarly, I had felt a calling deep in my bones to share the wisdom I'd gathered on my spiritual journey, to speak of souls and spirits, of the unseen forces that guide us. But I'd tucked that calling away like an old photograph, afraid it might scare people off. As the life review faded and those 5 questions settled in my heart, a cold terror gripped me. Here I was, 24 years old, standing at the edge of eternity without having truly lived as Jerome Braggs, the man I was born to be. I felt the weight of unspoken songs, ungiven teachings, unshed tears of compassion for those I loved. In that stark hospital room, the truth shone brighter than any stage light. If I died now, I would leave behind a catalog of could, have, beens. It reminded me of the prophet Samuel's call in 1 Samuel 3-9, when he finally answered God's voice and embraced his divine purpose. I realized I could still seize my moment. I vowed then and there that if I returned, I would stand unapologetically in my own gift, that I would sing not for fame but for healing, that I would teach others the language of the soul with the same courage that David poured into his psalms. I would live so fully that my own life became a song of truth, a testament that genuine purpose is the only melody worth singing. I carried shame like a hidden wound for most of my life, and in that moment on the hospital bed, its weight pressed on me with crushing clarity. I realized I had spent decades convinced my body was unworthy of love, because as a child, I was heavier than the other kids. Police taunted me with cruel nicknames: Big Boy, Chubby Cheeks, and each insult etched itself into my self-image until I recoiled from mirrors, avoided cameras, and even flinched at well-meaning compliments. My sexuality felt like a forbidden melody I dared not sing, so I buried it beneath layers of self-doubt and hushed desires. I silenced my intuitive gifts, the uncanny sense I had for another's pain, because I feared being labeled strange or delusional. Yet the psalmist reminds us that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. Psalm 139-14. And I realized I had never let that divine truth reach my heart. Instead, I clung to my intellect as the only arena where I felt safe. Academic praise and awards affirmed I was smart enough, but outside that realm, I felt hollow and unmoored. I had studied the law of attraction long enough to manifest pocket money for a Friday night movie ticket, yet I'd never used those principles to heal the vast emptiness inside me. So, on the edge of death, I made a vow. If I returned to my body, I would finally embrace my true self. I thought of Demi Lovato, whose candid journey through body image struggles transformed her into an icon of resilience. I remembered Oprah Winfrey trusting her intuition to build an empire of empathy and purpose. These giants of courage showed me that our deepest wounds can become the source of our greatest power. I resolved that I would stand center stage and let my voice soar without fear. I would honor my intuitive gifts by sharing them freely to comfort those in need. I would speak my love out loud to every friend and partner, so that no one who mattered to me ever wondered how deeply they were cherished. I would wield the law of attraction, not just to summon small comforts, but to remake my life from the inside out in radiant alignment with my soul's purpose. In that moment, I understood that the terror I felt was not of dying, but of leaving this world with my potential unclaimed and my purpose unfollowed. I chose to live not merely to breathe, but to thrive, to shine in the full brilliance of who I was created to be, and to help others discover the freedom that comes when they do the same. I knew I had only about 7 days to rewrite my destiny, so I resolved to summon every ounce of faith and imagination I possessed. I began each morning with a gratitude journal, writing not just that I was thankful for life itself, but naming 3 specific blessings: the warmth of sunlight on my face, the steady rhythm of my heartbeat, the kindness of the nurse who held my hand. By midday, I closed my eyes and visualized healthy kidneys, picturing them clear and vibrant, filtering life-giving blood through my veins, as if I were watching an artist restore a faded masterpiece. I asked the hospital social worker to bring me a three-dimensional model of real human kidneys so I could trace their shape with my fingertips, cementing in my mind the blueprint of healing. I overhauled my diet, trading cafeteria comfort food for colorful bowls of steamed vegetables and freshly pressed juices, each bite a deliberate act of self-love. At night, I surrounded my bed with an imaginary protective bubble of golden light, repeating silently, "Lord, cover me with your tender mercies." Lamentations 3:22. Trusting that divine compassion would shield me from despair. My parents became my allies in this spiritual campaign. Whenever a doctor came to discuss test results or a proposed procedure, they would stand between us, absorbing the clinical gravity and then translating it into language of hope. They never lied, but they told me the truth in a way that felt like a promise rather than a sentence. Before sleep, I shared three things I loved about each parent, each nurse, each visitor, echoing psychologist Brene Brown's insight that naming our vulnerabilities builds courage. These nightly declarations wove threads of connection, strong enough to hold me through the darkness. Slowly, as these rituals seeped into my bones, something miraculous began to stir. The machines beeped less urgently, my mind quieted, and I found myself believing not just in survival, but in transformation. I realized then that creating my own miracle was less about willpower alone and more about aligning my heart, mind, and spirit with the healing power already coursing through the universe. Each evening, as the fluorescent glare of the ward dimmed, I gathered my strength and turned to my parents, sitting just beyond the IV pole's reach. We formed a circle of love, each of us speaking three new reasons why we cherished one another. In those moments, I felt walls collapse. The harsh hum of machines faded and was replaced by the warmth of shared truth. I described how my father's laughter had guided me through childhood storms. My mother confessed how my small acts of kindness had sustained her during lonely nights. And I vowed to my sister that I would carry her hopes forward into every sunrise. We repeated that ritual, night after night, for a month while I lay tethered to a dialysis machine. The process was grueling, hours of my blood filtering through cold stainless steel, yet with every passing week, the dread of the doctor's 7-day prognosis lost its grip on my spirit. I woke each morning believing I would see another dawn, as surely as David declared in Psalm 118-24. "This is the day the Lord has made. I will rejoice and be glad in it." Although medical staff still whispered predictions of only weeks or months, the steady rhythm of my gratitude practice became my anthem. Every needle prick felt less like an assault and more like a call to live fully. Each night, I visualized my kidneys reborn, each tube of fluid transformed into rivers of healing light. In my tiny apartment, I kept a playlist of songs by Alicia Keys, whose raw honesty and "No One" reminded me that love and resilience often arise from our deepest wounds. Her melody became my prayer. When, at last, the doctors removed my dialysis access port, I felt a rush of disbelief so profound it nearly knocked me off my feet. 2 months later, I returned for tests that felt like the climax of a long spiritual pilgrimage. My nephrologist stared at the lab results as if he'd misread the numbers. He tapped the screen, then looked at me with wide eyes. "Your kidneys are functioning at full capacity. Your viral load is undetectable, and all signs of pneumonia and pancreatitis have vanished." He muttered the word miracle, then shook his head in wonder. In that moment, I realized the true miracle was not the absence of illness, but the resurrection of my own faith and purpose. I learned that healing springs from aligning every act of gratitude with divine intention. Our bodies respond to the prayers we live even more than the words we speak. Just as Jesus taught in John 10:10, "I came that they may have life and have it abundantly," I had finally claimed mine. If you've ever wondered whether a life can truly be reborn after devastation, know this. You hold the power to script a new chapter by choosing gratitude each morning, by speaking love each night, and by believing that every cell of your being can awaken to health. Share below which promise you'll declare tonight. Subscribe to walk this path of healing together, and may this story ignite your own miracle journey, reminding you that the greatest healers of all live within your heart. I believed I had mastered every lesson of that first ordeal, until 18 months later I found myself wheeled into the same hospital, the same sterile corridors, facing the identical litany of diagnoses. My CD4 count had plummeted again, my lungs once more filled with fluid, and the shadow of AIDS loomed as dark as before. This time, the doctor on duty, his voice tight with urgency, paused at my bedside and said, "I have to call your parents. Everyone's gathering upstairs to prep you for emergency surgery. We're going to try to buy you a day or two." He left me in that bleak room, tubes rattling at my side, alone on my deathbed for the second time. But no movie played out before my eyes as it had before. Instead, a deep, unwavering knowing settled in my chest, whispering that this recurrence was no accident. It felt less like fate and more like a message, my soul's final attempt to speak through walls I'd built too high. I realized the universe was tapping me on the shoulder, insisting I listen. And so I asked aloud, "What is it you want me to understand? What truth have I refused to face?" In that question, hope and terror collided. I knew I wanted more than mere survival. I craved true wholeness, a vibrant life, not just a body kept alive by machines. I yearned for restoration that reached into my bones and my spirit alike. I wanted the kind of healing that Christ spoke of in Matthew 11:28. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." This wasn't about staving off death a little longer. It was about learning to live fully before that final breath. As the surgeons prepared, I steeled myself. No longer would I rely solely on the techniques of manifestation I tried before. I recognized that my soul demanded a deeper shift. Not just mind over matter, but heart over fear, spirit over flesh. In that moment, I resolved to let this crisis unlock the lessons I'd been too proud or too afraid to embrace. I would discover what it truly takes to heal inside and out, and I would share that wisdom with anyone willing to listen. The moment my awareness expanded beyond skin and bone, I felt as if every breath I had ever taken resonated through the cosmos. The sterile hospital walls vanished, and in their place I perceived a tapestry of living light, woven from the prayers and dreams of every soul who ever walked the earth. In that boundless realm, time had no meaning. Past and future folded into a single truth that pulsed with divine intelligence. I could sense the heartbeat of creation itself, an all-embracing rhythm of love that reminded me of the promise in John 3:16 that God so loved the world. It was as if Christ's own compassion flowed through me, uniting my spirit with every suffering child, every weary traveler, every broken heart seeking consolation. And then I understood with such clarity that grief, pain, even my shame, none of it was wasted. It had carved a vessel in me capable of receiving grace. I saw, as King Solomon once wrote in Ecclesiastes, that there was a season for every purpose under heaven. My season of suffering had led me here to this revelation. In that embrace of oneness, I forgave myself for every quiet compromise. I forgave the world for every harsh word. I forgave my body for its betrayals. All resentment dissolved like mist in the morning light, leaving only the radiant core of love. When at last I felt my consciousness return to my frail, tethered form, the transition was gently soft descent rather than a jarring crash. My hands, once weightless extensions of universal energy, touched cold sheets again. The distant beep of monitors re-entered my ears. My lungs drew in hospital air. But I carried with me an unshakable knowing that life's greatest miracle is the transformation born from love's revelation. And as my eyes fluttered open to sterile brightness, a single thought anchored my soul. I had crossed death, embraced truth, and was reborn to live as a testament to grace. In that sublime instant, I was suspended between two extremes and incandescent brilliance, more radiant than 1,000 suns, and a profound abyss darker than the void before creation. I felt my sense of separation melt away as if every boundary between me and other had been erased. Then, without warning, a vibration rose from the core of my being, and I knew I was hearing a voice not through my ears, but through the very fabric of my soul. Its tone was familiar, like the purest essence of my own highest self, speaking without shame or fear. I recognized it immediately as the voice of Source, the same loving presence David referred to when he wrote, "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear?" Psalm 27:1. That voice spoke without words, yet its meaning was unmistakable. You are home. You are held. In an instant, I sensed that this presence was the origin of all light, all love, and all life itself. It was at once everything and nothing, bright and dark woven together in perfect harmony. Time ceased, and I floated in an eternal moment of absolute peace. It reminded me of St. Paul's revelation that we live and move and have our being in God, Acts 17:28. For indeed I was no longer moving through space moved through me. As I surrendered to that infinite embrace, every fragment of fear dissolved. Shame, regret, doubt all were consumed by that radiant darkness, reborn as light. And then, as gently as a sunrise, I felt myself drifting back to my body. My consciousness returned, carried on the wings of that sacred revelation. When my eyes opened once more to the hospital ceiling, I carried with me the unshakable knowing that I was forever changed, cherished by a presence beyond time, called to live out the truth I had glimpsed in that radiant in-between. I had never known life to be anything other than struggle and striving, and suddenly I found myself suspended in a realm that felt both intimate and infinite. In that space, I understood that everything I had ever learned about bending reality to my will affirmations, willpower, relentless pushing had its limits. Then, that familiar yet otherworldly voice spoke, and what it revealed burned itself into my soul. I remembered two truths above all, though I sensed there was more unwritten wisdom resting just beyond my recall. First, it showed me that the single most powerful medicine for a broken body and a weary spirit is wholehearted self-love. Just as Paul reminded the Corinthians that the greatest of these is love, 1 Corinthians 13:13, I saw that when I wrap my own heart in compassion, every cell responds, tuning to a higher frequency of healing and vitality. Loving myself fully isn't an act of vanity, but the very act of co-creating a life that feels like heaven on earth, life seasoned with joy that seeps into every waking moment. The second revelation stunned me. I had spent decades mastering how to force life's blessings, gritting my teeth, pushing until something finally gave, but I knew nothing of yielding, of letting life be good to me. I felt as though existence itself leaned forward, its dominant intention to bless me at every turn, if only I would open my hands and receive. It was like watching a master gardener tending a garden that begged to flourish, yet I'd kept my windows shuttered tight. In that instant, I resolved to learn the art of receptivity, to melt into gratitude, to welcome miracles without resistance, and to trust that life's generous pulse was meant to carry me, not just the other way around. This journey, I knew, would teach me how to love myself as my greatest healer, how to co-author my own abundance, and how to simply let life's good gifts flow freely into my open heart. And as the edges of that radiant realm slowly receded into the hushed glow of my hospital room, I became acutely aware of two worlds merging within me. I felt the cool plastic of the IV pole against my arm and the faint vibration of the machines monitoring my every breath. My fingers touched the crisp white sheet, and I could distinguish the rise and fall of my own chest once more. Each tiny drip of fluid into my veins sounded like a heartbeat of mercy. Somewhere in the background, a monitor emitted a rhythmic beep that blended with distant hallway voices and the occasional flutter of hospital sirens. It all reminded me that I had just walked perilously close to the infinite, yet returned to the finite with new sight. In that fragile moment, I understood I had received a profound spiritual summons. The voice and the light had not been figments of fever or wishful thinking, but a genuine encounter with Source itself. I felt a download and energetic imprint flow from my heart into every fiber of my being. It was as though the purpose of my very soul had crystallized within me. I knew without doubt that I had been entrusted with a mission to embody the medicine of self-love and to guide others in using that love as their own healing salve. I sensed that my former patterns of self-criticism and striving would literally shorten my days, whereas the practice of radical self-acceptance would expand them. Just as Neo chose the red pill to see reality for what it was, I chose to surrender my old self to this newfound truth. I resolved to relinquish every judgment I harbored against myself, and to forge a life where gratitude flowed as freely as breath. I would teach that genuine healing springs not from external remedies alone, but from nurturing the heart's capacity to receive life's blessings. In that moment, I realized my darkness had shown me the light, and my light would now illuminate the path for others. I realized then that my return to the world of the living came with a sacred commission to move through each moment with the expectation that life would conspire for my good. As my senses refocused in that hushed hospital room, the darkness and light of my vision gently receded into the familiar glow of overhead lamps. I felt again the weight of my hands on the crisp linen, each finger now distinct from the mattress below. The steady drip of the IV line and the rhythmic beeping of the monitor announced my rebirth, as though my very cells were exhaling relief. In that instant, I knew without doubt that what I had just experienced was more than a fleeting brush with death. It was a direct encounter with Source itself. In the span of minutes, I had walked between worlds and returned with a divine download of purpose burning in my chest. It was as if God had whispered in my spirit the same promise found in Jeremiah 29:11. "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." That promise was now mine to fulfill. I also understood that the man I had been, the one clinging to money, approval, and perfection, would never survive this transformation. If I tried to slip back into old patterns of self-doubt and people-pleasing, I would wither away. Instead, I chose to surrender my former self, much like the Apostle Paul's admonition to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness, Ephesians 4:24. I felt the weight of every unspoken dream, every suppressed gift, lift from my shoulders as I made a solemn vow. My life would become a living testament to radical self-love and courageous authenticity. Over the following days, even as nurses adjusted my medications and family members whispered words of relief, I cultivated a daily practice of intentional gratitude. I greeted the dawn by listing 3 blessings: me steady breath, the warmth of my mother's hand, the promise of another sunrise. I infused every meal with a prayer of thanks, recalling how Maya Angelou refused to let adversity silence her voice and went on to uplift millions with her poems. Her example reminded me that our deepest wounds can become wellsprings of compassion when we choose to speak our truth. By nightfall, I reviewed each hour through the lens of self-compassion. Whenever self-criticism crept in, I paused to replace it with kindness. When old fears whispered that I wasn't enough, I countered with the psalmist's cry, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts." Psalm 139:23. In honoring my own vulnerability, I discovered that wounds heal fastest in the atmosphere of love. Every time I rose from that hospital bed, I carried with me more than a healing body. I bore a renewed soul on a mission to teach others that the greatest miracle is the one we author by choosing to love ourselves wholly. May you too embrace this call to awaken your worth, for it is therein the gentle space between heartbeats that heaven meets earth. I remember feeling the weight of that moment pressing down on me as if reality itself had narrowed to one impossible choice. They spoke of two pills, the red and the blue, and in that instant I knew exactly which one I needed. I reached for the red pill, the one that promised transformation yet demanded the death of my old self. I felt a surge of terror because I understood immediately that even though my heart still beat in this hospital bed, a version of me would have to die right then and there. The man who had clung to shame, fear, and self-doubt would perish so that someone entirely new could emerge. I whispered yes, even though I did not fully grasp the magnitude of my promise. Looking back, I am grateful my ignorance spared me from turning away. I doubt I would have swallowed that pill if I had known the years of inner work ahead, the decades it would take to unravel every thread of social conditioning, every wound buried in my psyche. I had no idea that true self-love meant lovingly excavating my trauma, tending to it like a sacred flame, nourishing the very essence of my soul. In the weeks that followed, I learned the hard way that self-love is not an indulgence but the highest frequency available to us. Just as the Apostle Paul's encounter on the road to Damascus shattered Saul's old life, Acts 9, my near-death confrontation shattered Jerome's old life and ushered in a new reality. In those early days, I could scarcely stand my own reflection, yet I felt a fierce determination burning within me. Over time, my intuitive gifts unfurled like dormant wings. I became a medical intuitive, able to perceive the pulse of souls behind physical forms. My hands would hover over a person's heart, and I could sense whether their life force flowed freely or if dark cords of unresolved grief constricted their spirit. I saw in vivid detail how the neglect of our inner world manifests as illness in the body. It was as if God had granted me a living parable to teach others that to love ourselves wholly is to unlock heaven on earth. I am the way, the truth, and the life. John 14:6 echoed in my heart as I realized that self-love is the path to genuine healing. That red pill moment marked the end of one story and the beginning of another, a journey that would teach me nothing less than how to let life be good to me and to help others do the same. That harrowing journey revealed to me how completely my soul's energy had been cut off from my own body. In that life review, I realized the root cause of my suffering was simple, yet profound. I had not been living as my true self. From childhood onward, I had carried layers of shame about my appearance, my desires, my intuitive gifts, and I had buried those parts of myself beneath fear and self-doubt. Instead of embracing the inherent love and worthiness that flow from the soul, I believed I was unworthy of happiness or acceptance. Every time I silenced my feelings, hid my truths, or shrank myself to avoid rejection, I drained another ounce of my vitality. Because I was terrified of failure and desperate for approval, I chased success, recognition, and money rather than the dreams that set my spirit on fire. I traded the nourishment my soul craved singing on stage, sharing what I felt, living fully for shallow victories that left me empty. I suppressed my intuitive insights, even though I could sense unspoken emotions in others as easily as if I had X-ray vision. I denied my own vulnerability, convinced that exposing my heart would invite scorn. Each act of self-silencing, every withheld "I love you," every unpursued passion became another brick in the wall between my soul and my body. Over the years, I learned that the soul is meant to grow through our lived experiences, that it thrives on purpose and passion. When we deny ourselves authenticity and confession, we starve that essential spark. My awakening came when I saw how far I had strayed from the path that would truly feed my inner life. I vowed in that hospital bed that, should I be given another chance, I would honor my soul's needs. I would speak my truth, pursue the dreams that stirred my heart, and nourish my spirit with acts of courage and love. Only then could I expect my body to follow suit, reigniting the energy I had so long denied myself. I realized that without genuine self-appreciation, we starve our souls, watching our inner light dim day by day. As the medium, I began to connect with spirits on the other side, and they whispered regret after regret, tales of lives lived in fear, of love withheld, of creativity never unleashed. One elderly gentleman told me he always yearned to paint but never dared, while a young mother wept for being too busy to read bedtime stories to her children. Their stories were echoes of my own silence, and I saw how their souls had withered when they neglected their true selves. Through my medical intuitive practice, I watched clients' energy fields reveal precisely where their life force had ebbed away. Shoulders hunched with unspoken grief, chests hollow with regret, eyes clouded by shame. I saw that every choice to suppress a dream, to hide a truth, to deny a gift drained the soul's vitality and invited chronic illness in its stead. Decades of research confirmed this link, Dr. Kelly Turner's work on radical remission documents countless cancer survivors who credit self-love and wholehearted living with their recoveries. It took me years to truly grasp what my life review had shown me. My own ailments were not random misfortune, but the physical consequence of a soul starved for expression. I had believed affirmations alone or occasional indulgences would suffice, but real nourishment means daily acts of authenticity. Like a muscle, the soul needs regular exercise of speaking my truth aloud, dancing even when no one is watching, gifting my intuition to those in pain. Each sunrise became an invitation to feed my essence, a morning scribble in my soul, journal, a midday check-in with gratitude, an evening of soulful song. Slowly, I wove these practices into a tapestry of self-love so rich that my energy field began to glow again. I discovered that true healing is not power over the body, but partnership with the Sulan, that every deliberate act of self-honoring builds a fortress of well-being around us. In that place of aligned intention and daily devotion, illness flees and life blooms anew. In the weeks and months that followed, I felt a gradual but undeniable shift take root within me. My body began to recover not merely from illness, but from the long drought of self-neglect, and my days unfolded into something richer than I could once have dreamed possible. With each morning sunrise, I sensed a deepening vitality coursing through my veins as if my very cells were singing in resonance with the song of my soul. I came to understand that self-love is not a luxury, but the essential elixir that raises our energy, lifts our vibration, and aligns us with the highest frequencies of existence. As the Apostle Paul reminds us, our bodies are temples of the Spirit, 1 Corinthians 6:19, and when we honor them with kindness and compassion, miracles of restoration take place. Almost imperceptibly at first, blessings began to cascade into my life. Opportunities that once felt out of reach, an invitation to speak at a healing conference, a chance to mentor someone grappling with chronic disease arrived unbidden. I watched how, when I dared to sing truthfully from my heart, doors would swing wide. In the same way that Oprah Winfrey transformed her own traumas into a beacon of hope for millions, I found that authenticity has the power to magnetize abundance and cultivate unexpected joy. As I navigated the world with this newfound courage, the courage to claim my intuitive gifts openly, to embrace my sexuality without shame, to speak my mind even when it felt vulnerable, life rewarded me at every turn. Simple errands became adventures. A cup of coffee tasted sweeter when savored in gratitude. A quiet walk through the park felt like communion with God's creation. People I crossed paths with seemed to lean in, drawn to the gentle flame of my renewed purpose. I no longer moved through life in scarcity or fear. I moved in confident expectation that life itself was conspiring in my favor. I now trust, without reservation, that existence longs for my well-being. The universe asks only that I let it flow through me, and the way I do that is by loving myself fiercely and unconditionally. I give thanks every day for those near-death wrappings of pain, because they unraveled the falsehoods I had clung to and set me free. Disease ceased to be my enemy and became my master teacher, showing me exactly where my heart had frozen and inviting me to thaw it with compassion. If you have ever believed that illness is a punishment, consider instead that it may be a sacred messenger. When we shift our perspective and see suffering as a call to deep self-care, we open the door to profound healing. As Jesus said in John 10:10, "I have come that you may have life and have it abundantly." May my journey remind you that abundance begins the moment you choose to feed your soul with love, day after day, moment by moment. I have learned to speak my truth without apology. I honor my own limits and stand firm in my convictions, even when it risks losing the approval I once craved. I no longer chase wealth or accolades, but pursue what genuinely fulfills my spirit joy, connection, and the simple pleasures that set my heart alight. Were I to face death again tomorrow, I know I would answer yes to every question that haunted me on that hospital bed. I would depart this world free of regret, confident that I lived fully as the person I was meant to be. It may sound paradoxical, but I owe this awakening to AIDS and kidney failure. They shattered my complacency and delivered me to a place of radical self-love. In that crucible of suffering, I discovered that true healing begins when we choose compassion for ourselves above all else. If my journey resonates with you, if you too have confronted illness or felt the stirrings of a deeper purpose, please share your own story below. Hit like if you believe that love can transform even the gravest trials into miracles, and subscribe to continue exploring how to cultivate resilience, authenticity, and joy. Together, let us build a community where self-love becomes our greatest medicine and every heart learns to beat in harmony with its divine blueprint. Thank you for listening. May you be inspired to claim your own healing, to speak your truth, and to embrace the limitless potential that lies within your soul.